Hello students, last week we had concluded the lesson The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. Today we are here to discuss the exercises of your textbook. First of all, the first part of exercises is understanding the text. Let's see the first question. It says mention the three phases of the author's relationship with his grandmother before he left the country to study abroad. Let me remind you, I told you in the beginning of the story that the author has divided this story into three parts. So those three parts are three phases. I mean that half of his life has been divided into three parts. Those three parts are the three phases of author's relationship. If you remember, the one was the time he spent with his grandmother in the village. Second was the time he spent with his grandmother in the city. And the third is when he had to part with his grandmother as he had to go to university, as he had to go abroad for further studies. So these are three phases. So let us say the three phases of the author's relationship with his grandmother before he left the country to study abroad are: first, in village, which you will definitely write 2-3 sentences about it, that grandmother and the author, the author was completely dependent on grandmother in the childhood when they were living in village, as she would wake him up in the morning, dress him up, take him to the school and bring him back from the school. She would also feed him at the time of breakfast or lunch or dinner. So it was a very close bonding between the two. The second phase was when they shifted to the city. So you would say in the city, both the author and his grandmother, they were sharing the same room, and there was a beautiful relation between the two. But at certain points, a few things grandmother would disapprove of. For example, there was a change. Now she would not accompany him to the school because he was going by the school bus. But whenever he was coming back from the school, she would ask him what he had learned. And his answers would dissatisfy grandmother because he was learning all those subjects, sciences, geography, history, etc., where grandmother could not help him. So she had no interest. When she got to know that he was learning Western music, that very seriously displeased grandmother. She did not consider learning Western music as respectable. After that, she stopped discussing the school with her grandson. She was also surprised and shocked that the school had not been giving any religious teachings. And the third phase was that the third phase was when he went to the university for the higher studies. Then his room was separated, and the author felt as if the link of their friendship was snapped. Do you think it was snapped? No, because they were physically distant from each other, but their emotional bonding was intact. Both the author and his grandmother, they loved each other. However, they were distant from each other, but their love did not diminish. And after that, he went to study abroad, right? Okay. The next question is, mention the 3 reasons why the author's grandmother was disturbed when he started going to the school. We have already discussed in the first question, but does not matter. We will discuss this particular exclusively. Or when they shifted from the village to the city, Arthur's grandmother was disturbed. She was not happy. In the village, she had been accompanying him to the school, but here she would not accompany him to the school because he was going by the school bus. The second thing was that when he was coming, now she would not wake him up, she would not dress him up. So this is how a little things which she had been enjoying and loving doing for him, now she was away from this. And second important thing is that when he would come back from the school, he would tell his grandmother about all the subjects he was learning. She was not happy. Why? Because she could not help him. She herself was not educated. But the day, and moreover, she was disturbed that no religious teaching was done in the school, which really upset her. And another point that displeased and disturbed her was when he told his grandmother that he was going to learn Western music, because she thought that Western music was not respectable. Right? So these are the 3 points that you will mention here. Okay. Now the next is the 3 ways, mentioned 3 ways in which the author's grandmother spent her days after he grew up. Now after he grew up, after the author grew up, they had shifted to the city because the parents had settled in city, so they had called them there. Now in the city, grandmother had very little communication with her grandson. So how to spend the time? She would spend all her time by spinning the wheel, reciting her prayers. Even while spinning the wheel, she would recite her prayers. Sorry, she would recite her prayers. And then in the afternoon, she would feed the sparrows for half an hour. And that was the happiest time for her. So the 3 points here in this question was that she lived alone. She was given a separate room, but she had been reciting her prayers. So she accepted that loneliness. She never complained. The second point here is that she would keep spinning the wheel all the time and reciting prayers. And the third point is in the afternoon, she would take a break from spinning the wheels for half an hour. That was the time when she would be feeding thousands of the sparrows. Right? The next question is mention the odd way in which the author's grandmother behaved just before she died. Now, just before her death, this is something very moving. Just before her death, Arthur's grandmother, she had refused to talk to the family. The last day, the last night, she did not do her prayers. She forgot because she had been busy in celebrating the homecoming of her grandson. So now she wanted to devote all that time in reciting the prayers. So she just closed her eyes and she started telling the beads, even though the family, they had protested, but she did not pay any attention to that. She just ignored. And she lay peacefully telling the beads of a rosary, and she kept on reciting her prayers till the last breath of her life. Now the last question. The way in which the sparrows expressed their sorrow when the author's grandmother died. Although there were thousands of the sparrows that were being fed by the grandmother in the afternoon for half an hour. When the grandmother would feed them, they would come and some of them would sit on her head, on her shoulder, in her lap, on her legs, and grandmother would never object to it. But when she died, all these sparrows gathered there. Earlier, when they were coming in the afternoon, they had been making a lot of noise by their chirping. But that very day, they all gathered around the grandmother's dead body on the floor, but they did not chirp. They did not chirp. The author's mother, she had tried to feed them with the breadcrumbs as grandmother used to do, but they just took no note of it. And her funeral, soon after her funeral was carried off, all these birds, they flew quietly. And that's how they express their sorrow. Right, children? Okay, now let's come to the next part of the exercise. This is talking about the text. Yes. Now we will discuss here a few things. The author's grandmother was a religious person. What are the different ways in which we come to know this? Yes, try to remember. But what were the ways? How do we know that she was a God-fearing woman or she was a religious woman? Yes, there are different ways of her behavior. Number one, she had been going to the temple every day and reciting her prayers. Number two, at home, she had always been reciting her prayers, however, they were not audible to others. Number three, even when she was dressing up her grandson, then also she would recite the prayers little loud because her objective was to enable him to hear and learn the prayers. Another thing is she would spin the wheel, and while spinning the wheels also, she would recite her prayers. Just before her death also, she had been praying. She just refused to talk to everyone in the family because she wanted to carry on with her prayers as she felt that she had missed the prayer last night. Another important point here it is when she learned that in her grandson's city school no religious teaching was done. This really upsetted her. So that also suggests that she was a religious woman. Right? Now the next is describe the changing relationship between the author and his grandmother. Did their feelings for each other change? Of course, the answer is no. Let us first describe the changing relationship between the author and his grandmother. Right? When they were in village or during the childhood, when they were in the village or during his childhood, there was a very close bonding between the author and his grandmother. In fact, the author was completely dependent on her. She would take care of all her needs and he would also follow her. Their relationship changed when they had shifted to the city. In the city, however, they had been sharing the same room, but now the communication between the two, it had reduced. Why? Because now he was going to the school by school bus. So grandmother had not been accompanying him. So that had brought a gap between their friendship. However, we would say that there was no gap. It was not so that their friendship was finished. But yes, it was slightly affected. Actually, the communication was affected. She also stopped talking to him much when she learned that he had been totally in getting influenced by the Western style, the Western education, which he did not like. And the third point is the relationship between the author and his grandmother. It's in the second point, you can also say that now she was not waking him up, she would not be dressing him up. She had been reciting the prayers, but now while during recitation, there was no such intent that she would be louder to enable him to learn, right? And the third point is that their relationship was affected. In fact, the writer felt so, but not the grandmother. When they were given separate rooms, that made the writer feel that the link of their friendship was snapped. Now, what it was that the grandmother would not be able to see her grandson. Now, the little communication they had earlier since they have come to city, now that was almost not there. But grandmother had been busy in spinning the wheel and feeding the sparrows. Yes, children, after the rooms were separated, there was no communication between the two. But it does not mean that they did not have feelings for each other. Both the grandmother and the author, they kept on loving each other fondly. This is what is reflected when he was going abroad. He met his grandmother. She would not talk much, but she would express her emotions. She did go to see him off. She did not say anything, but she kissed him on his forehead. That reflects that her love for her grandson is the same, it is unchanged. When he came back, he was not sure that she would survive, but she was alive. He was so happy, and how that was the last day before her death when he came. She still celebrated his homecoming. So this reflects that their feelings for each other, they had been unchanged. They never changed, right? Okay. Now the third question is, would you agree that the author's grandmother was a person strong in character? If yes, give instances that show this. Of course, yes, definitely. The author's grandmother was a very strong person. She was a very strong person. How do we say that she was a strong person in character? She was a very strong person because she had strong beliefs. She was not formally educated, but she was always keen that her grandson should be well educated, should get the best education. She did not like his Western way of education and his Western way of living, yet she did not protest. She disapproved of it, meaning she disliked it, but she would never complain about it. That shows that she was so practical that she could understand the need of the time. She could understand what was needed, what was required by her grandson. She was a religious lady. She was very upset to learn that no religious teaching was given in the city school of her grandson. Yet she did not say anything, but she herself could spend her time silently saying prayers. She would go to temple. She would never nag anyone. She would never stop anyone. She was such a kind lady that she would be feeding. When she was left alone, when the author he had gone to the university, she was given a separate room. She did not protest, but how to spend the time? She had found the ways. She started spinning the wheel, and half an hour of the day, that was the happiest time of her day, that she had started spending in feeding the sparrows. So that shows that she was so strong. Another thing important about her strength, strong mind, is that when the author went abroad, She never cried. Very quietly, she sent him off. She was so strong that she had got some intuition about her death. That's why, on the day of her death, just a few moments before, she had told everyone to be quiet and she refused to talk and she just started praying and telling her beads. Even though the family protested, she ignored and she kept on praying till the last breath of her life. How strong the grandmother was, right? Another question is, have you known someone like the author's grandmother? Any such person like author's grandmother? If you know, write about that person using the idea from the lesson. Just first of all, do the brainstorming. If you had the same sense of loss, if you had the same bonding which was there between the grandmother and her grandson, have you lost or one still survives? And if ever there had been the chance that there had been a change in your bonding, whatever you have feelings about that person, do write. Fine? Okay. Now the next part of the exercise is thinking about language. Which language do you think the author and his grandmother used while talking to each other? Now, as the story has been written by Khushwant Singh, right? So, a Punjabi Sikh, so it is but natural that they must be talking in their mother tongue, that is Punjabi. Which language do you use to talk to elderly relatives in your family? You have to decide. Mostly we people use our mother tongue at home. When we are talking to our parents, our siblings, or our relatives in our family. Nowadays, there is a trend that we speak Hindi. But other than this, many people, they speak their mother tongue also. If one is Punjabi, would be using Punjabi. If one is Tamil, would be using Tamil. If one is if one is Haryanavi, would be using Haryanavi language, right? How would you say a dilapidated drum in your language? I know Hindi, so in Hindi I can tell you a dilapidated drum is of course Fata Purana Dhol. Yes. Now let us leave the fourth question. This is not to be discussed here, right? Okay, let's come to the next. Now this is related with the vocabulary and grammar part. Here you will find a very important thing which has been highlighted here. What it is, notice the following uses of the word tell in the essay. Tell in the text, sorry. Now you see that one word can be used in different ways with different meanings. This is the magic of English. Here in this very lesson, the word tell has been used so many times, but every time the meaning is different. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning. I hope you can understand. I will not tell you the meanings because later on you are going to have an exercise to match the meaning. At her age, one could never tell. She told us that her end was near. Now let us see how it is. Look at this. These are the four meanings. Make something known to someone in spoken or written words. Count while reciting. Be sure. Give information to somebody. Now you have to tell, make something known to someone in spoken or written words. Which which tell do you think is being used here? It is, if you just go back, here it is, just a minute. She told us that her end was near, right? Okay. Now the next is count while reciting. Count while reciting is that she was telling the beads. Here it is. Where is it? Yes, her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. It means counting the beads while reciting. Be sure, no one could, at her age, one could never tell. One cannot be sure. Give information to somebody. Here it is, I would tell her English words. Right? Yes. Now notice the different senses of the word take. Now this is for practice. Take. Now take meaning take to something is to begin to do something as a habit. To take ill is suddenly become ill. Now you will locate these very phrases in the text. You will find, for example, she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. She took to is that she began. She started feeding sparrows. To take ill. The next morning she was taken ill. The last night she was very active, but the next morning suddenly she became ill. Right? Now, the third exercise, very interesting. Just as you find that there are different meanings of till, similarly, for one particular action, there are different kinds of words. The word hobble has been used by the author. When he describes grandmother's activity, he said that she would hobble around, right? Hobble means to walk with difficulty. It was because of her old age that she would walk with difficulty. She would hobble because the legs and feet are in bad condition. Now, here in this box, there are a few words which express the manner of walking, not all the words. So, you have to pick up those words. Let me tell you the words which are used for walking. Shuffle. Shuffle meaning to walk dragging yourself, right? Then stride. Stride meaning you walk with long steps. All right. Swagger. Swagger meaning when you walk confidently or proudly. Okay. Then here it is waddle. Waddle meaning when you take short steps, right? When you are walking, taking short steps. Trudge and slog meaning when you walk slowly. Is that clear? And rest is just grammar. The italicized words in the text are she had been, I had known. That is, the writer has used the past perfect form of the verb. Rest of the activities we will not discuss, they are only for doing. That's all in the portrait of a lady. Next week we will start with a photograph. Till then, if there is any doubt in this lesson, you can always post on the EdGuru's platform and share with me. I will see to it. Goodbye. Thank you.